Hello?
Hey, Rich, it's Larson. You got a minute?
Sure, Larson. What's up?
Hello and welcome to a Got a Minute podcast. This is Larson Hicks, and I've got my co-host here, Pastor Rich Lusk. How you doing, sir?
Yeah, great to be with you, Larson.
Likewise, Rich. You're looking quite spiffy today.
Wanted to get dressed up for you. Such a
job interview or what?
Occasion.
Well, I felt bad. I've been wearing a baseball cap all day, and I took it off because I was like, I got to look sharp for Rod, and Rod's wearing a baseball cap. So now I'm not sure what I should do, but we'll just leave it off. Yeah, well, it's been a crazy week and a half here. We're recording on the 29th of January, and if you're not tuned in, I don't know how you could miss it, but Donald Trump's been elected, and so it's been kind of a flurry of activity in the media, and we've been really eager to have our friend Rod Martin join us for this podcast, and he's had some really wonderful commentary throughout, leading up to the election and since, and so Rod, welcome to the show. It's good to have you, sir.
It's great to be here.
So I'm going to give just a really, really brief introduction, but we'd love to get the more thorough version from you. For listeners who aren't familiar with Rod, Rod is kind of a fun LinkedIn profile to zoom through. Everything from Office of Governor Mike Huckabee to special counsel, the founder and CEO of PayPal, to all kinds of crazy, to chairman of Southern Baptist Convention. So quite a lot of crazy, things that you've done in your career, but generally an entrepreneur, venture capitalist, technology executive. I know you're the founder of Martin Capital, which is as I understand it, a group that's really focused on investments in technology companies. Senior advisor to PayPal co-founder Peter Thiel, right?
Yes.
Peter Thiel is, on the bucket list of people we'd love to have on our podcast someday. I really enjoy listening to him and think he's a really sharp guy. But all kinds of other things, business strategist and political, thought leader. So I first heard about Rod Martin at the Fight Laugh Feast conference that, as we were discussing right before we started recording, that was the year of COVID where they had booked a whole thing in Nashville. And I think it was like 2 weeks notice they had to they had to shift the whole thing from Nashville down to Franklin. And they pulled it off through some heroic efforts. Gabe Wrench and those folks did a really great job. That was a really fun conference, and among the cool things that happened, Rod Martin was one of the speakers. So that was where I first heard about you, and have been really thankful to have been introduced to you since then. So that's my really brief overview. What did I miss?
Oh, I don't know that you missed anything. I would definitely give a shout out to the Cross Politic guys. That was an amazing conference, and it was in the middle of the lockdown, for heaven's sake. It was their first ever conference. They're organizing it from Moscow, Idaho.
Right.
And 1,000 people showed up. It was incredible. So, they just couldn't do a better job. And as to me, you hit the highlights. I was one of the early guys at PayPal. In a different life, I was policy director for Governor Huckabee. I'm founder and CEO of Martin Capital, of course. We're involved in a bunch of different ventures across a range of technology. And I've been, an executive committee officer of the Southern Baptist Convention and president of the National Federation of Republican Assemblies. So you name it.
I love it.
You've had your hand in a lot of different things.
I'm involved in moving the culture. We want to see the creation mandate fulfilled. We want to be a part of it. We want to help shape the human future in a Christ-honoring direction. And that's what we do in every part of what we do.
Yeah, that's great. I would say even in having this podcast, I would say that's something that Larson and I have wanted to aim at, is generating mean, it's a podcast, so, obviously there are going to be limits what it can accomplish, but generating conversations that can produce cultural change through the church and in these different sectors, whether it's business and technology or politics, business, wherever, you name it. We want to see the reign of Christ brought to bear on all of life.
Yeah,
absolutely.
And Rod, I don't remember you mentioning specifically your eschatology, but the way you were talking at the conference, you sounded very much like a post-millennialist. But I figure that may not be what you are. But you remind me of all my favorite post-mill guys who are very optimistic about the future and very engaged in kind of shaping the future. Does that am I right there, or where you land on that spectrum?
Well, I am very optimistic about the future. The Lord has taken a couple thousand years so far before his second coming. I don't know if he'll take 20 more minutes or 20,000 more years. And this is the thing that Christians of all eschatological stripe are going to have to reckon with. We just spent a century waiting for the rapture, and it never came. Right. And that doesn't mean it won't come.
Sure.
But if you started doing that around the time the Scofield Reference Bible was published, you had a long time to wait in which you weren't getting stuff done.
That's right.
And I don't have that option. The Lord has told us that I'm supposed to be found faithful in my task at the moment he returns. So I got to work right up to it. And if that means, as many of my friends believe, that the whole world's going to burn down before Christ returns, okay, I need to be faithful right up until the moment that it all burns down and he returns.
Amen.
And if as Gabe and Chocolate Knox would say, in fact, the world is going to be progressively suffused with the gospel as the Great Commission is fruitful. And more people come to Christ and they work out their faith, and it affects every institution of which they're a part. And then the Lord returns. Well, so much the better. I'm all for that. Yes. Either way, you have the same duty and the same responsibilities.
Yeah, it's a good word.
Good way to put it. Larson and I, of course, would be a lot closer to the Gabe and Chocolate Knox post-millennial eschatology.
Well, of course.
But
you guys are CREC, aren't you?
We are.
That's right. That's right. However, whatever your eschatological position is, your duties are the same.
That's right.
They are.
In fact, the way you should understand your duty as a Christian where you are. Jesus told all of us, occupy till I come. He's given all of us talents, and he expects a return on those talents when he returns.
So, our post-millennial friends have understood that better. Yeah. Our amillennial and premillennial friends have really dropped the ball in that regard over the last century, with tremendously deleterious cultural ramifications and honestly terrible ramifications for the gospel. I mean, it's all fine and good to say don't polish brass on the sinking ship, but not many people want to sign up to be on a sinking ship at all.
Right.
And if Christianity isn't affecting the culture around it, people got to scratch their heads and ask why. The Great Commission is very, very comprehensive. And it starts with Jesus saying, all power in heaven and on earth has been given unto me. So if those things are true, it only stands to reason that people would wonder, why aren't Christians as dedicated to changing the world around them as, say, a Muslim is, or a communist is, or a Hindu is? And we really haven't been. In pretending that the whole mission is evangelism, which is certainly truncated from the Great Commission, in pretend, not to mention the creation mandate, if the whole mission is evangelism, we sure haven't done a lot of it. And if you ask pollsters, they'll tell you that hardly anybody asks anybody to church. Hardly anybody witnesses to their own friends. Well, they did back when we had a more full-orbed division of Christendom. And today we don't. and there's a difference. Now,
Mm-hmm.
that doesn't mean that one eschatological position is necessarily correct, but
Sure.
it definitely means that one of them had better results in the culture than the others have.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. The cultural fruit, that was one of the things that attracted me to a postmillennial eschatology, is seeing the fruit that this eschatology had borne, and not just in building culture, but also in missions and evangelism. One of my favorite books that I know I've cited on this podcast before is Ian Murray's book, The Puritan Hope, which basically shows, how a postmillennial eschatology, that's not always the label that would have been used, but basically a postmillennial eschatology drove the rise of the modern missions movement. And the loss of that and the more pessimistic outlook did have a tendency to wither that approach. Now, I will say there are some wonderful exceptions to that, and many times those with a more pessimistic eschatology are better at doing evangelism or missions, sometimes, than those with a more optimistic eschatology. But you use the analogy of a sinking ship. What if Jesus died to save the ship, and the ship's not sinking, but we're the ship has been saved, and now the point is to get the ship safely to harbor, and that the whole creation is being redeemed. That would have massive consequences for how we understand not just evangelism. And I like how you said that. It's not like the whole mission of the church. There's much more to it than just evangelism. It doesn't just come down to evagelism.
Yeah,
much more.
Yeah, but what if discipling,
full orb,
not less than,
much
more than,
right.
The evangelism produces changed lives, changed hearts, and renewed minds. And as that takes place, people renew everything around them. People redeem everything around them. And, you reach some critical mass, and it's like an atomic bomb.
Right. And so the result of that then would be the discipled nation that the Great Commission is talking about. The Great Commission is not just preach the gospel in a nation, it's baptize and disciple the nation. So the Great Commission is not complete just because you preach the gospel and evangelize people. The Great Commission is complete when you have a nation that you can describe as a discipled nation.
And not just one, but all of them.
But all of them.
And I was just reading in Exodus, and the Israelites they fled Egypt, and they get to Elam, and there are the 70 palm trees there. Well, that's representative, just like the 70 elders, just like the 70 Jesus sends out. That's representative of all of the nations in the table of nations in Genesis 11. It's representative of all flesh. And the Israelites were to be a kingdom of priests. Well, to whom are they priests? They have priests for them. Yeah, they're to be priests to the nations. And certainly that mission is dramatically amplified by the gospel, the first coming of Christ, the Great Commission, and so forth. But in the process of that, certainly the creation mandate is not repealed. So I did a documentary for Tom Askell a few years ago on vocation that addresses that at some length. And, the idea historically in Christendom has been that everyone's job is, or at least can be, a calling. If you're the janitor at Taco Bell, that, at least while you're there, is your calling. It's not necessarily your only calling, and it's not necessarily your permanent vocation, but it is for sure in that moment important. If you don't do your job well, somebody may die of food poisoning, somebody may slip and fall. All of a sudden there are widows and orphans that we didn't have to contend with before. And so, every single thing we do is suffused with meaning. It is bringing every thought captive and every aspect of the world under Christ's reign. And that's exactly how we ought to think about everything. It's not by force or compulsion. It's by the gospel going out and lives being transformed.
Yeah, that's great. That's really good.
I want to just kind of spend a little bit of time on that if we can, because I think you, Rod, are an exceptional man in that you've got a lot of talents, and you've done you're capable and competent to do a lot of things. And I don't expect every Christian to be able to live up to the Rod Martin standard, of cultural engagement. But I think everybody, Christians, whether they kind of get this kind of, every square inch kind of, optimistic, cultural engagement kind of vision, or they're kind of more stuck in the, like, let's just evangelize people mode. I think Christians in general, they want to make an impact. They want to use their lives well. And what I see a lot of is people who think that cultural engagement equals, consuming lots and lots of media, and following lots and lots of internet controversies and commenting on it, on social media. My take recently has been, if you are in the kind of prophetic phase of your life where God has given you a platform and made you influential, then you should use it, if you've got the skills and the wisdom to do it well. But don't grasp for that, instead, attempt to be faithful in perhaps the kingly phase of your career, and develop wisdom and be good at your job. So how do you already commented on it with the Taco Bell example and the documentary you did with Tom Askell, which, by the way, I'd love to get the name of that.
It's just called Vocation. It's part of the Wield the Sword series.
Okay.
So you can go to founders.org, which everybody should do, because wonderful website, wonderful ministry. And it doesn't matter if you agree with everything they have to say. They put out top quality, orthodox Christian stuff on a wide range of issues. And one of the things they did, and by the way, Chocolate Knox produced it, is this Wield the Sword series. And I believe I'm either the third or fourth episode in the first season.
Well, will you talk a little bit more about that? Like, say you're a, 28-year-old or 32-year-old, man who's fairly early in their career, wants to engage in the culture wars. Like, what's your encouragement to that young man? How do they make the biggest impact on shaping culture, as you talked about?
Do what you can with what you have where you are. Mm-hmm. And that doesn't mean you can't go other places and do other things, but wherever you are, be faithful in it. Paul was faithful in prison, for heaven's sake, and never stopped ministering, never stopped writing, never stopped evangelizing the jailers and the guards. There was simply nothing that could restrain him until he died. And then I'm sure he's doing things that matter in heaven. So, that's how we've got to look at it. So I've been a 28-year-old man, actually. And, at the time, I had just graduated from law school. I went to work for Mike Huckabee for a while as policy director. That was a great first job. And went from there to PayPal pretty soon after. And, I think we legitimately changed the world. It was, it's not sexy, it's infrastructure, but most of the things that matter in life are in fact infrastructure of some description. I don't think people appreciate how important a lot of those things are. And just in our first 2.5 years, we didn't just go from 0 to 25 million customers in 2.5 years. We enabled the creation of 2 million small businesses in that time. That's people who have some control over their own future, some say over their own schedule, some opportunity to, school their kids, all the things. And, we tried to do something that would make real lives better. Martin Luther said this really well. He said, it's not the duty of the Christian shoemaker to put little crosses on the shoes. It's his duty to make good shoes. Mm-hmm. And whatever you're doing, you need to do it as unto the Lord. And they should know we are Christians, not just by our love for one another, which sometimes is lacking, but also by the quality we put out. Again, I'm in Exodus right now, or actually I finished Exodus this morning. And, we spend all this time on Oholiab and Bezalel. these amazing craftsmen who create the tabernacle according to God's design. And all these chapters are spent on the intricate work that's done to create this. And again, we see the praise for these two men. We're still sitting here talking about them 3,400 years later because they were excellent.
Right.
And that's how people should talk about us 3,400 years from now. They should remember back to, wow, those guys really were amazing. They really did things that counted. They really, really were excellent. And that's what we should be striving to do.
Yeah. No, it's such a good word. It's something I think about and probably bring up on this podcast every other episode is, the Proverbs say, do you see a man skillful in his work? He will stand before kings. And you mentioned Bezalel, which is the other place to go. I think he's the first person in Scripture described as being filled with the Spirit.
Yeah, I believe so.
Right.
And of course, later we get the same thing with the temple when Solomon hires Hiram to do all that work. And again, the craftsman is lauded. He's not the king. He's not a prophet, but he's an excellent craftsman, and he does his job well. Mm-hmm. And we should all strive to be like that.
Yeah, that's good. Well, Rich, we had some other territory we wanted to cover. Thank you, Rod, for diving into the culture shaping conversations. It's one that comes up a lot on this show. We wanted to. I feel like we've talked a bit about your work. We kind of wanted to jump into. I don't know if Rich, you wanted to go any deeper into that, or if you want to move on to.
No, I think that was great. I think that's a good reminder. What's been called the Protestant work ethic or the Puritan work ethic and a reformational doctrine of vocation is so important because you can tell with a lot of Christian people today it's lacking. So definitely happy to talk about that anytime. But yeah, we do want to shift gears, and so we're about a week and a half into the Trump administration, and I think many of us would be overall pleased. Very pleased with how things
very much so. Yes,
up to a really good start. I think it's actually even exceeded the expectations of many Christians who have been very forthright in their support of Trump and Vance. So lots of good things happening. I'd like to get your take on that. What do you see as kind of the highlights so far? And then I'd like to really pivot from that. All the wins that we're seeing get racked up right now by the Trump administration, and talk about what are going to be, what are the challenges that come with this, with this vibe shift and this new political situation in which we find ourselves. A lot of Christians, I think, have felt like, Aaron Wren uses that language of negative world. A lot of Christians, I think, have felt like we've been in a situation where the political powers ruling over us have been very, very hostile to us with the Biden administration and all that. Now we've got a much friendlier administration in power, but no matter what situation you find yourself in, there is a certain set of temptations that come with that. And so what are the kind of things, basically, where do we go from here and what do we guard ourselves against? Knowing that the Trump administration has gotten off to a good start, what kind of things should we guard ourselves against? How do we take advantage of the situation? And how do we guard against becoming complacent, now that we have started to rack up some wins? So just kind of walk us through that, starting with what you've seen from the Trump administration so far, what you think the highlights are, and then we'll get into what comes next.
Well, first, we need to guard against the complacency you just cited. This is the norm for conservatives and especially Christians. They go vote one day and then they go home and they don't come back for 4 years. And it's absurd. Half of evangelicals still aren't voting after all these years. When voter turnout is through the roof, evangelicals are still sitting on their butts. So who can possibly justify that? That's so absurd. God has given us the ability to be our own kings in this country, this amazing republic that we share. And we act with complete wanton disregard for the blessings that God has given us. No other people has been able to govern itself in the way that our people get to. And we just abandon it to Christ's enemies, which is absurd.
So,
second, we need to guard against being overly critical of the Trump administration, because the truth is, if evangelicals had shown up, they would have actually nominated a different candidate in 2016, and they would have nominated a different candidate in 2020 and 2024. We had two Southern Baptist candidates running for president in 2016, Mike Huckabee and Ted Cruz. Ted Cruz actually grew up in a Christian school at Second Baptist Church in Houston, and most Southern Baptists didn't support him, didn't support Huckabee either. So if Christians have an issue with Donald Trump, and by the way, we all ought to be super enthusiastic about Donald Trump right this minute. Oh my goodness, what a great week we've just had. But never mind that. If Christians have issues with Donald Trump, and of course we always have issues with everybody because everybody is a sinner and nobody is perfect. But if we have issues, we should first have issues with ourselves. We did not show up in force, and we didn't rally behind that supposedly better candidate. Yeah. So we don't have a lot of room to complain. And third, we've got to guard. We have got to guard against the loss of our freedom. We dodged a real bullet in November. The Democrats kept saying democracy's on the ballot. Well, they weren't kidding. They were against it. And fortunately, it won. Yeah. Through no fault of their own, other than just being incompetent, apparently. So, we have to be realistic. Corrupt voter rolls, the banning of voter ID in California, all of these systems that are designed for fraud. And you say, oh, I don't think that they designed them for fraud. Well, if you had designed them for fraud, would you have done it any different? So what's the motive? These are smart people. So we have a system that is teetering on being lost. It feels very much like the end of the Roman Republic and the rise of the empire. At times, it kind of feels like the whole thing's getting away from us and maybe we're too far gone. I don't believe we're too far gone, though. I believe in a sovereign God who can literally do anything and can part the Red Sea and we can cross. And Pharaoh and his army are convulsed and inundated. This is the God we serve. So I'm actually really optimistic. Trump's been killing it. This past week is like none other in American history. And there's no reason to think that's going to change. And I just want to give you one highlight of that most people aren't talking about. And the people who should be talking about it are the ones who mostly aren't. And that's the incredible pro-life stuff he did this week.
Yeah.
You may know about the pardons of the pro-life political prisoners. People don't necessarily know who these people are, but for the most part, we're talking about 70-year-old widows and grandmothers who were tossed in a federal penitentiary for years and years in their 70s for praying peacefully outside an abortion clinic.
Yeah.
All those mostly peaceful rioters, they got off. Kamala Harris actually raised money for their bail online. They get nothing. But if you're a grandmother who prays peacefully in front of an abortuary, you're going to the pen. And that's the kind of thing that we've had for the last 4 years. They were going to consolidate that, and they were going to take that nationwide. Trump pardoned those people. Trump ended all federal funding for abortion over which the executive branch has discretion. But the one a lot of people missed, because it was buried in one of the transgender executive orders, Trump issued an executive order that says life begins at conception.
Yeah.
That's incredible, because here's the thing, guys. The 14th Amendment already abolished abortion. The Supreme Court just hasn't caught up with it, because it already says you may not deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. Yeah. Well, what due process does a baby get? I'm sorry, that's bunk. So we're murdering citizens, and the only missing link in that entire analysis is a legal definition of these children as children. If they are persons, they're protected by the Constitution. If they are not persons, they are not. That's been the lie we've been being told since Roe v. Wade. And all of a sudden, here comes the Trump administration saying, oh, yeah, that's a person. Whoa.
Yeah.
That's huge. And especially from a president we were confidently told by evangelicals for Harris is some kind of pro-abort. So, excuse me, he may have said some things I don't like during the campaign. That doesn't change his actions.
Yeah.
His actions are what counts. Don't look at what they say. Look at what they do.
Well, and you've also got J.D. Vance making his first public appearance as VP at the March for Life, and then giving a talk that is also far more clear on the life begins at conception issue than he was when he was running. That's one thing that I find interesting, is that, I think there were questions during the campaign about, what is happening with the Republican Party on the pro-life issue because of some things that were said. But now that they are in office, this is the most pro-life action we have ever seen a president and a vice president take, really.
We're used to people telling us what we want to hear and then doing the opposite.
Right.
This is actually a case where somebody told other people what they wanted to hear and is doing the opposite. Right. Trump is pro-life. Trump had a big personal conversion on this issue. In about 2011, he had a friend who had an abortion, and the aftermath was ugly, and it really shook him. And he's very serious about this, but he's also not an idiot. He knows he doesn't have the votes in Congress at all, and almost certainly will not over the next 4 years, to be able to pass a national abortion ban. So he said, I'm not for that. I'm not going to do that. Well, of course he's not going to do that. That's like saying, I'm not going to make the sun stand still. I'm definitely not. That's true. But what he did do is he got Roe overturned. And nobody thought anybody could do that, much less Donald Trump. He got it overturned. And he's doing all these things now that lay the foundation for a constitutional abortion ban and for defunding the left in all of these crucial ways. If there's not money to murder babies, they aren't going to get murdered. I mean, that's really the bottom line. And I can't guarantee 100% of babies will stop being killed. That's not how that works. Just like when we outlaw murder, that doesn't stop all the murders. We outlaw rape, that doesn't stop all the rapes. But it does deter them, it limits them, and it leaves us a handful of people that we can actually deal with from a justice perspective. And, that's the foundation he's laying. So my word to Christians would be, again, you guys haven't done your job. We have had 51 years since Roe v. Wade. And we still haven't persuaded the American people that life begins at conception. We haven't convinced people that babies' lives matter. What is wrong with us? And of course, that comes back to the evangelism issue. Most Christians won't walk across the street to tell their neighbor about Jesus. They also won't walk across the street to tell their neighbor to stop killing their babies.
Yeah, and I think what we have to understand is that the abortion issue does not stand on its own. You really can't. So obviously, from just in terms of the legality of it, and there you can, and so you could say the politics of it, yes. And I would absolutely be in favor of outlawing and criminalizing abortion because it's evil. Because it's evil. It's the murder of an innocent life.
I'm also for my governor Ron DeSantis passing a law here that to execute child rapists.
Right.
You know what we call that here in Florida, a good start.
Good start. Right.
We should have justice. We should protect the least of these. This is what it is to be a Christian.
Right. I think what we're seeing now, because I do think there are some people who in the culture, this is how depraved they are. Certainly this has been the case with some of your more radical feminists, is they will say, well, yes, life does begin at conception, but that's not a life worth preserving if it's going to interfere with my life. I mean, that is
exactly. And by that standard, I'm sure that somebody could find me equally inconvenient and
Absolutely.
get rid of me.
Right.
There's no limit to that.
Right.
If that is a
It's
human
dangerous.
life, and there's no question that that is a human life, I may not wrongfully take it.
Right.
That doesn't mean that we can't have the death penalty for child rapists. That person deserves to lose his
Absolutely.
life. What does a baby deserve?
Right.
Mhm.
Oh my goodness. If we can't protect babies, we can't protect anybody. And that's where you actually get the genocide that all these Democrat protesters are in the streets talking about. They are for the people committing genocide, both in Gaza and in America.
Yeah. So what I would say, so as a pastor, the way I look at it pastorally, obviously I can do whatever I can to advocate for laws against abortion, for its full criminalization, that it would be treated as murder. But what I think we're also seeing is that in order to make this case, because this is what was interesting to me, is that the election of Donald Trump was, as appreciative as I am of his pro-life work in his week and a half, that is not a proxy for the American people being pro-life at the same rate. Lots of people voted for Donald Trump who are not pro-life in any sense. And you saw that at the state level in a lot of ways. Like I think even in Florida, that there, I mean, I know that the bill that was up did not get passed, but it still got a lot.
But only because it required 60%.
Right, okay, yeah.
The bad guys got 57%. And this is exactly what I'm talking about. This is a state we're now winning by 15 or 20 points. This is a state where now we have the mayor of Miami. We have the school board in Miami. We've made shocking strides forward. And yet we can still lose 57% on something that legalizes, actually constitutionally mandates unlimited abortion through the 9th month. And it's mind-boggling how weak the church has to have been for half a century to still be losing on this issue in red states.
So this is what I think we have to do. We have to continue to make the full court press case that the child in the womb is a person with all the rights that attend to that, and even citizenship rights, like you talked about with the 14th Amendment. I think we also have to do much more to promote a biblical sex ethic, a biblical understanding of the family, and because the reality is, abortion is popular because people want to have sex without consequence.
Yeah.
And I don't think that you're going to get popular support for ending abortion until people see how destructive the sexual revolution as a whole has been. And until we start to honor the marriage bed, as Hebrews 13 puts it, and until we recover a biblical sex ethic as a people, where we understand how damaging fornication is, how damaging adultery is, that God designed for sex and marriage to go together, and sex is wonderful in marriage, but it's disastrous outside of marriage. I think, and then along with that, the whole idea that children are a blessing, because you've got a lot of what you could call antinatalism in the culture too, where children are just seen as a nuisance, and because even if you did outlaw abortion, you've still got issues with marriage rates and birth rates and all of those kinds of things. So what we need is a complete worldview revolution when it comes to these kind of things. What we need is the rolling back of the sexual revolution and replacing it with a new kind of sexual revolution, but one that promotes God's design instead of doing everything to undermine and subvert that design.
Well,
the sexual revolution has been so catastrophic,
absolutely,
in real people's lives, that you're getting these weird secular things like the 4B movement among all these feminists who want to, well, I'm going to abstain from sex outside of marriage for all the wrong reasons. But hey, I'll take it, And on the other hand, the red pill guys, the Andrew Tates, and they see women as disposable, but they are reacting to the consequences of what we've done since, honestly, before I was born. This all started, I was born in 1969. This started before that. And, the fact that people are waking up, even without God, to the fact that what we're doing is insane.
Yep.
Is really good news. And it's one of the reasons that we're seeing something you guys are probably aware of. The polling says that we're seeing a significant number of young Gen Z men come back into the church, and actually more of the men than the women.
Yep.
Yeah.
That's a first in the last 300 years.
Yeah.
So we're seeing some really positive things.
We're seeing that on the ground in my congregation, and I think, Larson, you are too. Absolutely. For men to be to attend church at a higher rate than women. I mean, obviously, we want everybody in church,
of course,
men and women, but it is fascinating and striking that all of a sudden you have more young men in church than young women. Young women are being radicalized into a kind of feminism that is leading them further and further away from God's design for who they are. And men, I think in many cases, now in some cases this is problematic because they're being radicalized in the Andrew Tate kind of way or the neo-Nazi kind of way. But I think in general, a lot of young men are being radicalized back into a kind of Christian faith. And so you've got guys like Joe Rogan, which obviously he's not a believer, but talking positively about Jesus and the Christian faith and having people on his show who will talk about the gospel and talk.
He may be a believer a year from now. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
And you're seeing this with Jordan Peterson, and you're seeing this. Elon Musk the other day, it's been a few weeks ago, said that he considers himself a cultural Christian.
Yeah.
Now, well, this is the guy who was positing, that we all live in a computer simulation just a few years ago, and I wrote about that. It's actually fascinating. I wrote an article for the Florida Baptist Witness on this, and the gist of it is this is like Paul going to Mars Hill and utilizing the unknown God, to tell them about Christ. Well, Elon, simulationism is just creationism, dude.
Yeah, I think there's a Christian theologian, Barclay.
And by the way, the only way you'd know who the coder was is if he inserted himself into the sim. And it turns out he did. Yeah. His name is Jesus. And so, you've got an open door there. The whole world is reacting to the evil that we've endured for decades. And it's coming around in a way that is gospel friendly again in some interesting ways. And that's not to deny anything Aaron says about negative world. I actually completely agree with that analysis, but it is hopeful about moving out of negative world.
Yeah. So that brings me to my next question. So what I would love to see happen is the Trump presidency be every bit as conservative as what we have seen in the first week and a half, continue with that, and be wildly successful, so successful that there can't really even be a challenge from the left, and MAGA get passed on to Vance or whoever the suitable heir would be, and you see this continue to build momentum. And maybe we look back to the 2024 election as a real game changer, a real pivotal moment where things changed. And I'd love to see that happen. The thing is, the American electorate is very fickle, and the American electorate is often not very smart. And we also know that there tend to be these wild pendulum swings in the culture war and in American politics. I mean, we even saw it in 2016 when we went from Obama to Trump. I mean, you just could, it was almost like you're getting, political and cultural whiplash. So my question would be, what can we, and I know you talked about this a little bit already with talking about like religious freedom and those kinds of things, but what kinds of things can and should we be doing? So again, I'm a pastor, Larson's an elder, Larson's also a businessman. Obviously we've got all kinds of entrepreneurs and various people in various vocations in our church, and some of whom are very politically active. What kind of things can we be doing at this point to ensure that we get more of what we've gotten for the last week and a half, and we guard against, say, that backlash or that pendulum swing, or even the kind of complacency that you talked about? What are some practical things we can do?
Well, first thing is we have to understand that God has created 3 covenantal institutions: the church, the family, and the state. And he is Lord of all of them. So we should think Christianly about each of them and do what we're able to do individually and corporately to influence all 3 of those in a more God-honoring way. And they all need it. The family is in a terrible state of disrepair in America right now. The church, honestly, I'm not sure it's doing better. It's certainly losing ground in a lot of places. And, many quarters of the church have watered down their message terribly, even if they're on paper faithful. And then the state has been a train wreck for a very long time. And we're kind of living on the inheritance here. So all of these things need attention. And for any of those things, you actually have to go talk to people. I can't disciple my child if I can't talk to my child. I have to actually put time on task. I can't make my church better if I'm not involved in my church. In the Southern Baptist Convention, as you know, we've had the rise of some very woke people. We've had the rise of egalitarians. We've had a bunch of things happen. And, that's easy to control. Any church can send 12 messengers to the annual meeting and vote the suckers out. And They just have to choose to do it. And that's a basic stewardship ministry of every church and every believer. And the same is true for the state. If you're not registered to vote, honestly, you're in sin. I mean, this is a country where we are collectively and individually given responsibility for how the state governs our society, our children, our grandchildren, and we have a responsibility there, unquestionably. So get registered to vote, get involved, however that may look. I mean, certainly you might just kibitz on the internet, but it would be better to volunteer for a candidate or maybe be a candidate. It would be better to give money, because money is the mother's milk of politics, just like it is the church. Without, as the guy said to the astronauts in The Right Stuff, no bucks, no Buck Rogers. We actually got to pay the bills here, guys. We like eating and living indoors. And so all these things are important, but it's about individuals taking responsibility with what they have, where they are, what they can do themselves.
Yeah, that's really good. I appreciate that. And I really do agree with you that we need reformation in all three spheres. If you think of family, church, and state, obviously all three need reformation. Before the election, one comment that I made is that the biggest threat to America is actually not the Democratic Party ticket. The biggest threat to America is the judgment of God. Now, one way God might judge us is by giving us bad rulers.
I think the Democratic Party is the judgment of God.
I mean, obviously, the judgment could be much bigger than that. The judgment could certainly go way beyond that. And further, I would say, well, so this is another way that I framed it. We got obviously the better of the candidates that was on the ballot back in November, and we're already seeing the fruit of that. We've experienced what some people have referred to as a vibe shift, where all of a sudden, like, conservatives don't feel so threatened or oppressed. We have, say with Musk purchasing Twitter, there's a free speech platform now, which I think has made a significant difference. There are lots of opportunities for young conservative and Christian men to be entrepreneurs and to build things right now. So lots of great things happening. But a vibe shift is not the same as repentance. And getting a reprieve is not the same as securing God's blessing. So it seems to me we do have a tremendous opportunity, but it does seem to me also that unless we take advantage of this opportunity, and I think this is really what you're getting at when you're saying we've got to do things like walk across the street and evangelize our neighbor. If we don't have broad repentance, and if we as a nation don't turn back to God, it's entirely possible that we will see this as a wasted opportunity and a wasted reprieve, an opportunity we had that slipped through our fingers because we didn't make the kinds of changes that we should have made.
Well, absolutely. I mean, there's absolutely no way that any free society can be maintained in the long run without repentance and redemption, because the hearts have to change. I mean, let's just be real. What do sinners do? Sinners sin, and we're all sinners. So if you're regenerate, at least you have the Holy Spirit indwelling you to help you become progressively sanctified over time. But the unregenerate are actually becoming more and more consistent with their rebellious presuppositions. So over time, they will fling away liberty with their hands. They will absolutely not abide a free system in the long run. So first and foremost, we need a great awakening in this country. But we're not going to get to that great awakening in exclusion of these other things. We have to keep the wolves at bay. And the truth is, we really nearly lost our freedom in November. It's really that bad. The fact that they want to censor you, they want to put grandmothers in prison for peaceful prayer. They want to, I mean, you've seen what the socialists did in England. They took power and immediately turned out 5,000 violent criminals from the prisons to make room for people who post memes. I'm sorry, these people are bent on totalitarianism. So we have to fight these fights. We have to fight for our families. We have to school our children. We can't hand that over to the state. We absolutely have to be responsible for our churches. And we must take responsibility for our government. And if we will be active, it doesn't take all of us. It doesn't even take a majority of us. It takes a determined minority who just won't stop. And if anybody has shown that, it's the minority of one that is Donald Trump, because anybody else would have been stopped long, long ago. And he's like a freight train. He just keeps coming. And that's how we should be.
One of the things that I want to come back to that you talked about, Rod, because I think you guys are both 100% right about all of this. Our culture needing to be sanctified, a great awakening. The three different spheres all being reformed and revived. But I want to come back to something that Rod said earlier about how we couldn't get Huckabee or Cruz elected. The evangelicals won't show up and vote, and even when they do, they don't vote for the right folks. And I guess the question I have is, like, how do we get evangelicals to read politics more shrewdly? I feel like our evangelicals are so foolish, and we want hypocrites. We would rather vote for the people who say the right things than vote for the people who do the right things. Evangelicals love respectability and seem to love hypocrisy, which just sounds like Pharisees. So how do we get evangelicals? I heard somebody say about Trump and the polls leading up to the election that Trump is kind of like McDonald's at the polls, where people eat there more frequently than they're willing to admit. If you were to ask them.
Betcha.
But there's this like love of respectability, in evangelicalism that kind of leads to, well, I'm going to vote for the guy that looks and sounds most like my pastor. I don't really care what they actually do. I just want to be able to be on record saying that I voted for the more respectable looking one. How do we get past that?
Well, and I think we see that at the highest levels. That has been a lot of the problem in the church. So, all the way back in 2015, Russell Moore was still head of the Ethics and Religious Liberty Commission, and they did a joint event in a big arena in Nashville with the North American Mission Board. And, it's all about evangelism and missions. And all of a sudden, they bring out on stage Jeb Bush and Marco Rubio, two Catholic candidates for president. Well, okay, they're good guys. No problem with that. Glad Marco is now Secretary of State. He's going to do a great job.
Right.
But they didn't even invite the two Southern Baptist candidates for president.
Right.
And why were they politicizing an evangelism event anyway? Right. Well, I can tell you why. I mean, first of all, Russell is just a closeted Democrat anyway. And, now he's at Christianity Today. His board chairman endorsed Harris. Both of his partners in that after party curriculum they've done, which is just Democrat propaganda, both of them endorsed Harris. The only one who didn't actually endorse was Russell Moore. But Russell, of course, is running a publication that does nothing except advance the Democrat propaganda line. So, that's part of it. They wanted the weakest Republicans, and no knock on Marco there, but we saw what happened to Jeb. He spent about $150 million to get 3 delegates and just was getting slaughtered by not just Donald Trump, but also Ted Cruz. Did I mention a Southern Baptist candidate who wasn't even invited to this Southern Baptist event? So you've got guys who, partly are compromised in a fifth column, but you also have guys who just love that respectability that you're talking about. And I think that's how David French got seduced ultimately. Now, he's indistinguishable from, Kamala's campaign manager or something now, but, he got there in phases. And now he gets most of his income, best I can tell, from the Atlantic and the New York Times. So of course he does what they want. Yeah. And of course he's speaking to their audiences. And of course he's ashamed of the great unwashed who show up in churches. If only they would, go to Tim Keller's church and vote for Harris. And it's just absurd. So fortunately, the evangelicals who voted overwhelmingly correctly in the last election, and all of this effort to co-opt Christians that we've seen especially heightened in the last 8 years failed. But that requires more and more voices like you guys out here sounding the alarm. Don't listen to these guys. Pay attention to the word, apply the word. Know these candidates aren't going to be perfect. Let's move toward better and better. Yeah. You don't get the lesser of two evils. You get the better of two choices. That's all that's possible before Christ returns.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
Yeah, it's a frustrating thing. And as you're saying that evangelicals don't show up to vote, hardly, I'm kind of quietly thinking, well, good. I'm glad they don't. Most of them
some of them shouldn't.
Yeah,
that's
most of them
absolutely true.
Right.
But if more of them did,
yeah,
generally speaking, if more evangelicals showed up, they would be unstoppable.
Right.
And when they complain about this or that candidate, it's completely either disingenuous or foolish, depending on the speaker, because they have the numbers to determine the outcome. They can at least dominate the Republican primary process. If they don't, it's because they choose not to. They got to get with the program.
Yeah, it's good. It's really good.
Rod, this changes the subject a little bit, but do you have any thoughts on other things that are being talked about a great deal right now and in various ways intersect with the Trump administration, things like AI or cryptocurrencies?
I think that we're going to see a renaissance in blockchain in particular, which is so important. It's so much more than crypto. People don't grasp. If you're talking about blockchain, what you're really talking about is not an app, but an operating system. Mm-hmm. And the various cryptocurrencies operate as apps on that OS, and they are just the tip of a huge iceberg that will ultimately encompass everything. It's a shift from a system in which you are the product, you are monetized by selling your data, and privacy is basically impossible. And the entire system architecture is designed in a way where breaches and hacks are constant and inevitable, towards something where you control your data, you control your privacy, everything's secure, and yeah, you're going to have to monetize that differently. But the truth is, we're already there. 20 years ago, if you had tried to put a bunch of stuff behind a paywall, you'd have just failed. Now that's normal, and creators on Substack and X are making money from subscriptions, which absolutely sounded crazy again 20 years ago. Now it's the norm. and people have 40 different subscriptions online to different things. So can you move to a blockchain-based economy? Yes. Will that be better? Infinitely better. Will that happen as a result of this administration? Well, Donald Trump named my friend David Sachs, who was our chief operating officer at PayPal, to be his AI and crypto czar. And so I can assure you, whatever David Sachs puts his hand to is going to be successful. It's going to be correct. It's going to be awesome, actually. And just a little bit on AI. There are good reasons to believe that AI could increase national productivity as much as 10x over the next 10 to 15 years. And that's true for any economy that really adopts it in a big way. So we're talking about a massive increase in wealth, which is another way of saying a massive reduction in poverty.
Yeah.
And it does not have to destroy a bunch of jobs. Now, individual jobs may come and go, of course. 80% of the population used to work on farms, and now it's under 2%. But all those people aren't unemployed. They're not in bread lines. They're doing more productive things with the gifts God gave them. And really, the only issue here is the rate of change. If you slow down from 90 to 65 because you think a cop's up ahead and you do it kind of gradually, no big deal. You barely even feel it. If you slam at 90 miles an hour into a tree, you're going to feel it. So, the rate of change is a factor, but in general, this is going to create vastly more employment, not destroy it.
Yeah. Yeah, I totally agree with that. I find that there are a lot in conservative circles who are really concerned about, automation taking jobs and AI taking jobs. And I feel like it sounds so, empathetic, to care about these people whose jobs are going to be lost. But I think just the logic is lost on folks about just productivity. And I think you take it all the way back to, there was a time where before the invention of the wheel, where people carried things from one place to another. And as soon as the wheel and the wheelbarrow was invented, was there outrage over the job?
Oh no, I don't get to carry things.
Right.
No.
Right.
You just free people up to do more productive work.
Right.
I mean, that's the whole history of the last 300 years.
Right.
We've had this revolution in every single area and accompanied by a massive population explosion, which, by the way, is turning the other direction now. But ignore the demographic implosion we're facing. For the last 300 years, we've gone from around 1 billion people to less than 1 billion people 300 years ago to almost 9 billion. And I do say almost because the Chinese are over counting their population by about 120 million, and it's getting worse. So almost 9 billion. And yet the world is richer than it's ever been. And I mean that at the micro level. We have a childhood obesity crisis now in West Africa, for heaven's sake. When I was a kid, we were sending, care packages to Ethiopia, and now that's just a different world. And the rest of the world has moved dramatically in the direction of European and North American living standards. I remember very well when Korea was a third world country, Taiwan was a third world country, Singapore was a third world country. Now they're first tier. And that can happen in just a couple generations if you respect God's law regarding private property and theft and avoiding covetousness. That's where we've gone. In the process of all of that growth, are all those people unemployed? Well, wait, if you were automating more and more things and having more and more kids over a 3-century period, you'd think 95% of the population would be in a bread line, but they're not. They're working, and they're working more productively and being remunerated better than they ever have in history. So So this analysis is static, it's flawed, it ignores history, and it's not going to play out in the 21st century any better than it did in the 20th or the 19th.
I feel like there are folks that are really concerned about what AI is going to do to, creativity and people's ability to think critically, and then there's of course the, I know Elon has kind of famously at times been really scared of the potential of actual artificial intelligence sort of becoming nefarious or something. But anyway, there do seem to be some sharp people who are really concerned about AI and transhumanism and that kind of stuff. And I'm just kind of curious if you've engaged with any of those conversations or feel like there's any legitimacy to those concerns.
For many, many years.
Yeah.
Transhumanism is certainly not new. And this quest to create an artificial intelligence that is functionally a god has been going on for quite a long time. So much so that there are now some shrines in Japan where they've created an artificial intelligence powered robot who is recognized as the cult's god. And, the human desire to make gods in their own image and bow down to them is just unstoppable. It goes back to the beginning of Scripture, and we're not going to see that go away. What I would say to it is Elon's not wrong. I mean, that's almost always true anyway, but Elon's not wrong. AI could be dangerous. I've seen the Terminator. I've seen the Matrix. These things, right. Pay attention, guys. Don't be dumb. Yeah. On the other hand, AI is not sentient.
Right.
George Gilder makes an incredibly good case here, and you can read bits and pieces of this in several of his books, but actually one of the more interesting is a little ebook called Gaming AI. And he makes the case better than anybody that computation is not comprehension. It just isn't. It isn't sentient. It isn't sapient, and it isn't creative. And you still need the human element. I think the tell here, and I know everybody thinks we're gonna have AGI any minute. Maybe, but is it going to be a person? Is it going to be Commander Data? No, it's not.
Yeah.
Could it be someday? I can't guarantee you it couldn't, but it ain't going to be next Tuesday, and it's not going to be next decade either. Yeah. These are insoluble problems from a human perspective, and maybe with AI tools we could solve them someday, but not right now. So these are tools. They're very powerful tools. Think of them as sort of intellectual chainsaws. You don't want to mess with a chainsaw either. But the fact of the matter is, I use AI a lot. It extends my creativity. What it does is it eliminates the need for hours of pointless research. I can find things quicker. It's no different than my Bible app. I have the Olive Tree app on my phone and, on my laptop and on my desktop. And it all syncs up. So my notes are everywhere. My highlights are everywhere. I've got umpteen commentaries, at least 24 Bible translations, all kinds of different study Bibles, study notes, all just a click away. So, my Bible study, I have cut the time necessary to do things enough that what I'm doing right now with my regular daily Bible reading is the equivalent of 5 hours of research before.
Yeah.
That's radically more productive. And it means that I'm a lot better equipped all the time and getting more so at an accelerating rate. And that's been my experience with AI so far also. I have a friend who just created an app entirely using AI. He didn't code a line, but it's all his creation. The AI wouldn't have created what he created, and it certainly wouldn't have fine-tuned it, but he used it as a tool to create this thing that he's already made in about a week, $200,000 on.
Awesome.
And it's really worth it, guys. It's totally that valuable. I get it.
Yeah.
That's what AI is good for. It's going to unleash human creativity in ways that we can't even imagine yet.
Yep.
And that's a wonderful thing. That means that everybody gets to live up to all of their gifting, and every part of the body of Christ is going to get better.
Right. Yeah, I think about I used to work at a labor market data economic modeling company, and you'd look at the productivity of people who work in the energy sector. Just the amount of wealth that each employee generates, and it's just staggering. And basically, what you're describing is that level of productivity. That ratio of wealth that's generated per individual just skyrockets as you make people more.
Well, and in my case, you could make a case that what I just said is I eliminated the need for a research assistant.
Right.
That's one way to go with it.
Right.
But that's not right. What I want is a research assistant empowered with these tools.
Yeah.
And me too.
Right.
And now we're many times as productive as I would have been by myself. And I can make so much money from that I can hire a third assistant who is also similarly equipped. And now we're doing the work that it used to take a whole company to do. So, if everybody is liberated to be able to do that, like women were liberated with household appliances and washers and dryers and all the different things that came online 100 years ago, if you liberate people to be able to pursue their giftedness, it is extraordinary, and it's going to make the world radically better. And I would just top that off with this. I hinted at the demographic collapse that we're looking at. We've got good data that suggests that China is going to lose at least half its population over the next few decades, possibly quite a bit more than that. They could go from their dishonest 1.4 billion that they're claiming, they could go all the way down to 380 million. Wow. In which case the United States would be more populous than China. And we're seeing a number of countries like that. Russia is in free fall. South Korea is in free fall. Japan has been in free fall for a while, and it produced a generation and a half so far of deflation and economic stagnation. And at least their rate of loss is more manageable than what China's about to have, or Germany is already in the middle of, and other countries. So if you want to mitigate that at all, first and foremost, actually obey the creation mandate. Be fruitful and multiply. God wasn't kidding. He was right also. Right. So there's that. But the other thing is you can compensate to a great degree for a lot of these things with more powerful productivity tools, such as AI, such as the robots that Elon is now producing. That's going to be really cool. People are going to be shocked. And those things help. But I would just remind you that a robot doesn't buy a house or a car. And so there's a limit to the economic productivity that can come from that, especially in a consumer-based economy.
Yeah, great point. So one thing I've heard, and I know we're going to wrap this up here in just a minute, but it's not so much the fear that AI will eliminate jobs as it is that AI will degrade the human person by becoming a substitute for work or a substitute for thinking. And so fears what this might do to education. Are kids going to still write their own papers? Are they just going to punch something into AI and, get a paper that way? And the impact it could have there. I think those kinds of concerns are true of all technologies.
Yeah, exactly.
And so I don't think it has to go that way. I think there's the potential for it to go that way. It is true. There are some people who misuse technology. It should be used to unleash greater productivity. The downside is there may be some people who would use it in other ways, although I think that would catch up with them pretty quick if they...
Well, and they will. Sinners sin. This is the rule. We should always assume that anything that comes down the pike is going to be abused often and regularly.
And
that's
immediately.
how it works.
As soon as possible.
At the same time, it's kind of silly to say these things when you consider that when I was a teenager, the big debate was whether we should be allowed to have a calculator in a math class. And no, a calculator made it possible for us to do a lot more, a lot faster, to learn more advanced concepts rather than have to still be doing all this longhand work that we'd already learned. We already knew how to do those things.
Right.
We didn't need to keep doing our third grade math in ninth grade. And calculators were transformative in a lot of very positive ways. Now, unfortunately, at that same time, the public schools were degrading. So I'm not at all sure that we're ahead of where we were then anywhere outside of private schools and homeschools. But the point is sound. And my personal experience with AI so far underlines and highlights it. It makes me much more productive, much more creative. I'm able to do a lot more with a lot less. And the cost is radically lower than what I would have faced just a very short time ago to do almost anything.
Well, Rich and I have had we had a whole podcast about this sort of romanticization. Gosh, I don't even. I'm struggling with the word, but being romantic about the going backwards, to like an agrarian or a simpler time. There's this kind of sense that things were easier then, things were more simple, things were being moral was easier to do because you weren't tempted.
That's just silly. Have these people not cracked a history book? Are you kidding? I mean, look at the 20s. For that matter, look at the 1830s or the era before the Great Awakening. I mean, oh my gosh, these people were heathens. And there were actually significantly fewer percentage points of the American population in church in the middle of the 18th century than there are now.
Right.
So, all this romanticizing the past. I'm an historian by training. I get it. But, the truth is, if I went back, I would die very quickly of high blood pressure. And I wouldn't have glasses, so I couldn't see anything.
Right.
And I wouldn't have any way to communicate with anybody. Everything I do is online. There's simply, that's a terrible world. And if you're a woman, all the more so, because you're going to spend 8 hours a day just on household chores before you think for a second about spending time with your children, or any of the other things that you have to do. So we're just not realistic. We assume that in the past it was just like now, only a little simpler, and that's not at all true.
Yeah, you're so right about that.
Yeah. And I think it's about stewardship, right? I mean, I think ultimately what we need to be talking about is to whom much is given, much is required. And and there is a responsibility that comes with, a greater level of power, let's say, at your fingertips. It requires greater degree of virtue and greater degree of wisdom, to wield that power well. And if you don't have those things, then it can be much more dangerous, right? And so, it cuts both ways. But I feel like that's the direction we need to be going is steering people towards greater wisdom and virtue in utilizing these tools.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, we just spent 300 years doing something that's never been done in human history, unless possibly it happened before the flood and we just don't know. And that is sustained economic growth of an average of 2.8% for 3 centuries. Nothing like that has ever happened. And, it's like everything else in life. You need a little patience. You don't really see it at first. And then after a while, it's like, whoa, what happened?
Yeah.
And that's where we are. And it's accelerating in many ways. Now, why is that a good thing? I can tell you why that's a good thing. In 1800, 94% of humanity lived in what is officially defined as extreme poverty. That's $1 a day. That's it. 94% of humanity lived in extreme poverty. And in the last 25 years, we took 1 billion people out of extreme poverty in 25 years. So, the world is getting radically better in countless respects. And I would posit, scholars debate, how that all came about. It's not clear cut, but I can tell you what it is. We followed God's law better. We had a Reformation. And if you'll notice, the Industrial Revolution and the Entrepreneurial Revolution took place in places that were most influenced by the Reformation, specifically the Scottish Reformation. And what that did is it unleashed an entire new world. And then you took those ideas, and I'm a Baptist, but honestly, it was Presbyterian ideas much more than Baptist ones, although we had a part too, that helped create America, combined with Jacobite, not Jacobin, but Jacobite political theory that was current in the mid 18th century. And you put all those things together and you end up with the freest society in the history of the world.
Yeah.
And a society in which covetousness is actually looked down on and success is actually praised. And in that environment, people innovate. They don't hide their light under a bushel. They innovate. They're out there trying to solve people's problems. And the beauty of capitalism, the crucial thing that all of its critics miss, is that capitalism is just the embodiment of the golden rule at a societal level. I can't make a single penny without solving somebody else's problem, and so well that they want to pay me, because I can't make them pay me.
Yeah.
So I have to constantly be thinking about other people and what their real problems are and how I can solve them in a useful way that they will appreciate. And every economic endeavor is based on that. The spread of that idea around the world is what's transformed the world. It's a good thing. It's a Christian thing. If we lose Christianity, not that it can be lost, but if we lost dominant Christianity in the West, and particularly in America, we would lose that too. We would lose innovation. We would lose entrepreneurship. We would lose all the things that have made us the good things that we are.
Yeah.
And that's what we have to avoid.
You're right about that. Capitalism or the free market requires you to serve your neighbor.
Yes.
You may not love your neighbor, but you do have to serve your neighbor in order to survive.
Yeah, it even gets pagans to serve their neighbor. It's amazing. God actually harnesses their greed to make them do good. What an amazing thing that only God could have possibly come up with. And yet it's just baked in the fabric of the universe. All you have to do is obey enough of his law for this stuff to start working. And, oh my goodness, Katie, bar the door.
I got one last question, and then Larson, you can kind of wrap things up. Rod, one thing we're seeing on the right, sort of the fringe of the right, is a rise of what I would call racial identity politics. I don't know if you've seen this, but it's definitely out there. What are your thoughts on that? Obviously with wokeness on the left, we have seen critical race theory and how it infiltrated school curriculum and that kind of thing. But it seems like in some ways we're seeing something comparable on the right. There are obviously some differences as well, but this racial identity politics from the right that is especially attractive to, it seems, certain young white men. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I'm not surprised when you consider the way white men in particular have been demonized, that they would react to that. And they do have a good point in this one respect, which is that cultures tend to grow up around discrete groups of people who tend to be kind of an extended family. There is an English culture. There's a Scottish culture. But America puts the lie to it all because we're from everywhere. We're a bunch of mongrels. And literally anybody can come from anywhere and be an American, not because, we're stupid and, have misinterpreted the 14th Amendment to grant birthright citizenship to anchor babies. That's not what I'm talking about. You can come to America and be an American by believing what Americans believe and loving your community. It's this really cool civic form of adoption. I can adopt you as my child, and the same thing happens. You're not native born, but it doesn't matter. You're sort of naturalized through adoption. That's actually a picture of the gospel. The gospel is of adoption. All of us are adopted by the Father based on the atoning work of the Son. And we are elevated, not just servants of God, but sons and daughters of God, co-heirs with Christ. And of course, God isn't going to die, so there's not going to be an inheritance there in that sense. Heir in the sense of status. We are children of God with the second person of the Trinity, which is a remarkable, unbelievable, and frankly, incomprehensible thing. So America works like that. We work by adoption. And it's the same thing. You actually have to be a disciple of the American idea, or you're not allowed in. At least that's how the system's supposed to work, unless you game the system and open the border and flood the country with a bunch of the prisoners from Maduro's prisons in Venezuela and the new Marxist president in Colombia's prisons there. You know, if you do it that way, you're going to end up with MS-13 running American cities like Aurora. You're going to end up with all these terrible things because they didn't come to be Americans. They came to harm and steal from Americans. That's stupid. That's something that Donald Trump's doing a great job opposing. But ignore that. If you come through the door, not through the window, if you do it legal, if you do it right, anybody can become an American, and it's a glorious thing. So I think this racial identity politics is extremely wrongheaded. I think it's antithetical to the gospel, and it's just really, really harmful. Yep. And I think we need to have a lot of sympathy on these folks and understand where they're coming from. I think we need to be merciful and gentle wherever we can, because I understand the reactionary aspect of this, but what they're doing is horribly wrong.
Yeah. Yep. I agree with everything you said there. I think you're exactly right. I think it is. I agree with you on the sympathy part. I think you've got a lot of young men who feel like the system is rigged against them, and they have been demonized in various ways.
Only because it is.
And it is.
That's it really, truly is. That's what we've been doing for the last decade.
Yeah.
And that has to stop.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah. No, I totally agree. But the weaponization of race from the other side is not going to be the answer.
No. Why would we want to commit their sins?
Right.
You know, it's just dumb. And I don't think it's exactly equal and opposite. I have certain friends who've, adopted this term, the woke right. Mm-hmm. I kind of have issues with that, but I understand the point, and it's not without any merit for sure. These guys are going off in the ditch, and you see this over and over and over. Whenever there is an action, there is always a reaction. In that sense, the world is somewhat dialectical, and we have to resist that. We don't want to be reactionary. We want to be Christian.
Very well put.
Yeah, indeed. Well, sir, it's been a delight to have you on the show, and I say this a lot with our guests, but this is definitely true. I feel like we could talk for another several hours, and I think it'd be a lot of fun for all of us.
It would be fun. Yeah.
So we'd love to have you back sometime. Thank you for making time. We know you're very busy. If folks want to, I thought we'd link to rodmartin.org. I know that's where your Substack is located. Are there any other places that we should point people to?
Well, I wish they'd follow me on X. I'm at 120,000 followers, up from about 26,000 8 days ago.
Wow.
So we're having a little bit of a boom there.
Okay.
But yeah, go to rodmartin.org, sign up for the newsletter. It's free. I just put out a thing today on birthright citizenship that I think will be quite surprising to a lot of people. Legal analysis on that. Yesterday, I did a video on Trump's remarkable pro-life first week, and definitely some information in there that most people don't know. And we're just always putting out good stuff. We an article the other day on the economic consequences of demographic collapse, and just this kind of stuff. So for the juicier bites, go to X, and for the meatier stuff, come to rodmartin.org.
Awesome. All right. Well, we will link to those things. And again, really appreciate you making the time to be on the show. We'll hope to have you back soon.
The God a Minute podcast is a ministry of Trinity Reformed Church in Huntsville, Alabama. If you like this podcast, you might enjoy one of our other podcasts, The Good Life Podcast, featuring Matt Carpenter interviewing experts in their field about how their work contributes to the good life.